Okay, so I'm going to try to be brief here. So really the main message I want to give you is that there are 3 documents we'll be working on in the breakout group that will be talking about endorsement. And if you read the documents, then I don't need to say anything, because really the whole point is going to be to try to improve these documents. But I want to go through some highlights of where I think they need that and why. So all of this is flowing originally out of some of the priorities of ISCB with respect to education. For anyone who isn't aware of it, ISCB has this thing called the strategic map, which is the plan of all the things the society wants to do. Several of these fall into the general area of education, and a few of these specifically in the area of training are really what we're working on at this point. And one of these concerns the question of certifying training programs or training courses. And I'll say more about this shortly, but certifying courses is at a much more advanced stage. There's essentially a commitment to do this. It's pretty far along. Certifying degree programs is something where we're really trying to put together a proposal from this committee to the ISCB Board of Directors and get their endorsement. So that's going to be a bit more of an effort. But that's essentially what we're saying here. So there's good progress on course endorsement, and there's one of the 3 documents we'll be referring to is a draft version of the document we would ask someone to use as an application to have their course endorsed. So let me see if this pointer works here. I think it's dead, but all right, so the idea is to have, as you've already heard a bit about before, some benefits to affiliation as well as benefits to the society for people to affiliate their courses. And there are a number of different areas that go into this, and essentially the question we want to ask today is what needs to be on that application form? What do we need to know to certify these courses? And a lot of that feeds into the other questions of how do you show that a course is satisfying the competencies, the KSAs, and so forth. It should be satisfying. Is it following best practices? So some of this is just general information, what you need to know just to say what is the course, and getting into the course contents. You've heard a bit about bioschemas already. Some of the idea here is that we're trying to have a formal way of saying what is this course supposed to be teaching in a way that we can rigorously evaluate. So the plain text course outline, learning outcomes, but also mapping to bioschemas, and then getting into some of the questions of how we're going to assess that. So does it meet the competencies, or maybe KSAs, or one of these other measures is the right way to assess this, but does it satisfy the competencies we would want to see for this? How is this being ascertained? So what are the assessments here? What are the educational activities that are feeding into this? So this is one component of the form, so we can see that best practices are being followed here. And there are also some questions of what do we as the ISCB need to ask about beyond just following best practices educationally. So you've probably heard at this meeting, so ISCB has a code of conduct. Anything under the ISCB badge would have to follow that. It has to be inclusive. There is also a more mercenary level. ISCB would want to have some value to its members for the endorsement, so giving a discount on the fee for taking this course and so forth. So that basically is one of the 3 documents, and probably I think we'll end up spending more time at this meeting on that particular document because it's further along, and it'll be more something we would ask you to do offline is work on the other 2, although we'll see how things go in the breakout session. So the progress on degree and certificate endorsement, as I said, is not as far along. This is really at the stage where what we want is a solid set of documents that represent a concrete proposal where we can go to the society and say, we're ready, we think we should offer this, this is how it will work, and get this discussed at a higher level. So we have draft documents that were essentially put together at the Cape Town meeting, and this is what we want feedback on. So again, there are advantages to endorsements. So we would have essentially a certification from the ISCB that we are endorsing a degree program, what this means, how we allow this to be advertised, and what ISCB would get from this is really, I think, not that much, honestly. I think it's more something we think is needed for the community. So the application fee was mentioned before. This number can be discussed. There were really two purposes there, and one of these we already heard about is just to discourage frivolous applications, because we won't have the bandwidth if everyone everywhere wants their courses affiliated immediately. The other thing is because this is likely a lot of work for the reviewers, we discussed the idea that maybe the reviewers who are going through these should get a small honorarium. And that fee would cover the administrative costs and maybe tiny honorarium, just so it's that there's some incentive for people to become reviewers. Another question that's worth discussing is the scope of this. So we've heard a lot about different personas. Mostly we've talked about educating bioinformaticians. So for degree programs, we would be talking about maybe bachelor's, master's, and PhDs in bioinformatics. I will say we haven't talked about it much, but it's something I personally feel strongly about, that we should be endorsing the bioinformatics content of biology programs. I think the life sciences field really, really needs our expertise, and we should be going out and helping people develop them. And when people develop a program that we feel meets the standards of our field for training life scientists, we should be telling them, yes, this is a great program, advertise it. So as with the other forms, we ask for a variety of general information. It's more detailed with a degree program than with an individual course, as well as wanting to know about the content. So again, what is this covering? It would be a more substantial application. We want to know about program faculty, for example, and so forth, because we have to evaluate not just is this a good course, but is it credible for the people claiming to offer this to actually offer what they say they're going to be offering. And really the hardest part of putting one of these applications together will again be the question of establishing that this meets the minimum standards of the profession and that best practices were followed in developing this. So this, I think, is one of the places where we need a lot of work, and the mastery rubric is maybe getting in some of the key ideas that need to be added here. But basically what we want to show is we want people to be able to convince us that they've followed a valid process of setting out what are the learning objectives, what are the KSAs, competencies, and so forth that feed into those, what are the learning experiences, what are the assessments, and how are these mapping to one another to show that this is a valid class, as well as, or a valid degree program, as well as other things like telling us about where formative assessment will be used to improve on this in subsequent cycles. We also just need some general certification. So is this person actually able to sign something for their university? Every university has legal restrictions on these things. We just need to know someone is able to sign for this. And a lot of that is really feeding into the third document, which is the process we would propose this would go through. So the third document is describing at this point a fairly detailed process, although there's still some holes in it, that really comes down to a pre-application phase where this is submitted. We would have this screen just to see is this a credible application, a phase one where we would have a reviewer panel, which we propose to be roughly modeled on journal reviews, where there would potentially be multiple rounds of feedback, resubmission, and so forth, to get to a phase two review. And the phase two review would be kind of due diligence by the society to ensure the program actually exists, they have the facilities to offer it, and so forth, followed by the formal endorsement if all of this is successful. We propose this would be a 5-year renewable thing, where essentially endorsement would mean the society would publish this. We'd say we've endorsed this degree, put it on the web page, and the program would get a logo they could use in their materials. And then there's a whole review process document. I know you can't read this. The document is in one of those links, just showing each of the stages we proposed here, and in yellow where we think there are missing pieces that would need to be developed to actually have a working process. So many missing pieces, but that's why we want your help here. And I think that's all I had to say about this. Again, read the documents and this will be much clearer. Is there a question?
The Royal Society of Biology in the UK runs a quite comprehensive degree accreditation program, and I know that Cass been talking to David Coates, who basically leads that up for them. How much The other thing we do in the UK is go through, well, I know we definitely do it in Dundee, is go through a 5-year cycle of curriculum review and internal accreditation. So there are those documents that describe what all the key learning outcomes and so on are. I would be loath to have a system that we set up being a free text type thing. I think it should be very much a matrix where you can map existing things from your existing curriculum documents, which you should actually have to hand map those through to the ISCB criteria for it being a biology or a computational biology degree at whichever level, and that then will firstly minimize the amount of extra work that's needed for someone to prepare accreditation materials, and secondly minimize the subjectivity of a review, because you'll be able to go and see specific exemplars of work, assessments and so on, matching those KSAs and actually evidencing that those are achieved through that particular degree. And much of that should actually be pre-existing in the institute, so it should be just a repurposing of that rather than a de novo heavyweight application. It will be a substantial application, but it's actually a repurposing of existing material that's there.
Yes, and that's certainly the idea of what we want there. So it's not in the form, but that mapping, the matrix, is really what we want to see and the core part of this. And I think there are some challenges that in the States we have to go through a similar process, but of course it's not exactly the same. We have our regional accreditation authorities, each of which does things a little differently, but and of course we have our own KSAs, but people who have been through the mapping matrix process will be able to go through it again with the different
Yes, so it should be able to take whichever documentation your particular institute works with and just map that against the matrix with exemplars, and it should be relatively straightforward to achieve then and to assess.
Yeah, I hope so, but that is something that needs to be added to the forms, really get that completely fleshed out.
So finally, I think Sarah has one slide.